Hello and welcome to Hamer Reviews. My name is Christopher Hamer and today we're reviewing the Nikon 200 to 500mm F5.6 E telephoto lens. Now I think this lens is really exciting. It's one of the best lenses I think Nikon has produced in years aimed at the prosumer and amateur market. 500mm is an incredibly long focal length and you can spend thousands of pounds for a 500mm lens. This, however, costs just 1,000, 1,200, somewhere in that region. I think it's incredibly good value. In terms of design, it is, as you would expect, a lens that extends as you use it. So at 200mm, it's actually quite compact and very much comparable to the 70 to 200 2.8 lens that I have mounted on the D300 here. But when you extend it out, you do end up with a very long lens, especially when you add the included HB71 lens hood. So this is certainly a substantial amount of glass, which does further reinforce the great value for money that this represents. In terms of controls, if we just start there, you have a manual auto switch. You have a focus limiter switch, so you can limit this to 6 meters and further, or the full range it's capable of. You have built-in VR, which is massively important on a lens this long, and you've got the normal and sport setting for VR as well. In addition, you actually have a lock for the lens barrel as well, which locks it in at 200 so it can't extend by accident in your bag, which is really helpful. It also has a very substantial tripod collar, and a nice lens foot here, which is very handy and very much advised. I think you would probably end up using this mostly with a monopod, if not a full tripod, because at 500mm it is difficult to hold steady. But the tripod collar, should you wish to, is completely removable, which I think is another great feature. So you can actually add a different tripod collar if there's a third-party supplier that makes one that you'd prefer, or if you just want a lighter lens, you can take off the hefty metal foot, though it is a plastic mount. So if I just add that back on, I shall demonstrate what this looks like when it's mounted on a camera. I'm using my D300 because it's the only F-mount camera I actually have about at the moment. So I think it's going to be a good way of showing you the actual size on the body for reference. So it's actually really well balanced. Despite being quite so large and heavy, when it's actually retracted, it doesn't look ridiculous in my opinion. Obviously, as you extend it out, it does become a little more front heavy, so it is worth bearing in mind that this is a heavy combination. But it is manageable. When I was shooting wildlife with this, I was doing it handheld without a monopod, shot for most of the afternoon. Yes, it's fatiguing, but it certainly wasn't impossible and, to be honest, didn't cause me any issues, so it is completely usable. It must be said the built-in VR on this lens is very effective, which it has to be. With such a long focal length, it's really important that you're able to stay as steady as possible. And at 500mm, even if you're shooting at, say, 500th of a second, it is going to be challenging to get sharp photographs. Obviously, you have a fixed aperture of 5.6. Now, yes, you can get 500mm f4s, however, they are going to cost you £5,000 plus, probably, in order to get one. So this is much more affordable. At 5.6, at 500mm, you need it to be a bright day to get photographs. Realistically, it is difficult to get them at dawn and dusk. This is not the kind of lens that you're going to be using to get those sort of, almost nighttime photographs of wildlife. It's simply too slow for that, but I think that's fine. This is an entry into super telephoto lenses that I think only really the 80 to 400 lens in Nikon's lineup really compared to. There are some third parties such as Tamron and Sigma that make lenses that even go up to 600mm, I think like the 150 to 600 Sigma, but personally, I think this is a really good balance because I think those mostly go up to f6.3, and being fixed at 5.6, that extra stop of light is really important, as I mentioned. Even at 200mm, this lens is superbly sharp, and at 500mm, it seems to keep the same level of sharpness, which is just mad. for this price range. I know I sound like I'm fawning over it, but I've always liked nature photography, but I've never actually had lenses longer than 300mm. The fact is they get very expensive very fast, and so I mostly used a 70-200, in fact this one, with a 2x teleconverter, and every time I did I was disappointed. The fact is that teleconverters just aren't that great when they're attached even to 2.8 lenses, and I was never happy with the sharpness that I got. This optical formula in the 200-500 is way better than this with a 2x teleconverter, despite the fact that this would be I mean, if you had the new version of the 70-200, you're talking £2,500 plus to have the E version of this lens plus the 2x teleconverter. So this, again, just great value. It is aimed at nature photographers, motorsports photographers, those of us that enjoy getting outdoors. And I actually think it's a great one for astrophotography as well. I've got this photograph of a comet that I took recently and I'm really pleased with it. I think considering that it was shot on a slightly wobbly roof with a tripod fully extended to just get me over the horizon, it was challenging conditions, but this was mounted to the Nikon Z6 with the F/Z adapter, which I'll show you in a second. So in combination with the VR built into the lens and the in-body image stabilization built into the Z6, this is just killer. And actually that brings me on to something really important. If you're going to use this with the Z6 or Z7, I think you're going to be really impressed because you get that extra in-body image stabilization. You are going to gain so much in terms of steady photographs. I found I could shoot handheld down to 1/200th of a second, at 500mm. Handheld, really, it's mad. Really impressed by it. Addressing the elephant in the room, let's say the 180-400mm that Nikon makes, this is clearly not as sharp as that lens. But that lens is so much more expensive. I think this has 90% of the performance for pretty much 10% of the cost, actually, if I think about it. So the value, again, is great. Yes, it is heavy. So if you struggle with heavier lenses, this probably isn't going to be for you unless you can be sure you can use it with a tripod or monopod. Equally, it's going to suck some dust in because it does extend very far. There's no two ways about it. Equally, one of the things that does bug me about it is quite how far you have to turn this lens in order to extend it. On a lot of lenses, as you get to, say, 500mm, well, I was going to say 500mm, but as you extend it to the maximum focal length, the actual distance you have to turn it gets shorter, whereas on this, you just keep turning. And it does mean that you can't really do it in one fluid movement. So for instance, if you start off with an object quite close and you need to zoom in, it will take a while to do that, which means you're moving your hand off, which means you might miss the shot. I have seen people complain about the fact that it's not an Arca Swiss compatible tripod foot. This is a budget lens. Like, in all honesty, for what Nikon's doing, I'm not surprised they didn't do that because I think it just would have been an additional cost. It's not weather sealed either, which is a little bit disappointing. So it's not as water resistant as, say, a 70-200 is. But again, given the price, I think I would rather have a lens that maybe I take a chance with when it's raining, and I've only paid sort of 1/4 than I might expect to pay for something that's sort of professional grade, versus having to spend that extra money. This is a low-level entry point into super telephoto photography by an actual camera brand that's sort of making the camera as well. So from that perspective, I think that Nikon actually have been very fair. So if I just take the D300 off this lens, I'm just going to show you what this is like when it's mounted with the F/Z, so you get an idea of the actual focal length. I'm just going to pop the 70-200 back on here to reduce the levels of dust. So you basically added a further inch to the length of the lens. That does mean that if you're shooting this with a Z6 or Z7 plus the MB N10 battery grip, this is going to be very forward balanced, so that you're going to end up wanting to really hold the lens quite far forward. That's fine. I don't think it's a problem. It's just something I think you should be aware of. When you add the F to Z adapter, it does add another amount of length, which will make it a little bit more forward heavy. You're not going to want to use the tripod collar on the F to Z adapter. It's far too close to the body. You're going to want to use that tripod foot. I wouldn't even entertain the idea of trying to use this on the F to Z adapter's tripod mount. Overall though, I think that this is an incredibly good value lens. It performs astonishingly well given the price point. I think Nikon have really come up with something great, and I do hope that we see very soon a similar lens for the Z6 and Z7 series, hopefully at a similar price point, because I think it's going to be a real killer lens to have in your inventory. Hopefully you found this review useful. If you have any questions, pop them in the comments below. If you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel and give this video a like as well. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you again next time. Goodbye.